and welcome to BRAIDAR, the business of beauty. My name is Jade Mparu, and this is I think it's our 19th episode, or maybe our 20th, which is a significant milestone. But I'm just going to say 19th for the sake of what I actually think it is. So, thank you guys for tuning in once again, and also thank you to those of you who've been watching for a long time now, for several months now. I know you guys are enjoying the different topics that we've like gone into. So yeah, thank you so much for that support and that interest that you've shown all throughout. And I think for our 20th episode, I've got something interesting in mind. May or may not have to do with Bratz, may or may not have to do with Monster High, may or may not have to do with the Barbie movies, but just mark your calendars for that next week. And yeah, but for this week, I thought something that I've been researching that I thought maybe would make a nice topic. And it has to do with a few of the other topics I've touched on, like when I talked about in person brand activations, when I talked about community being the basis of your brand's fandom. When I say fandom, I don't mean I don't mean the like yes, customers, but more so even the creation of your brand. That's more so what I mean. It's like this sort of co-creation dynamic that goes on in a lot of sort of, I don't know if they call them industries or niches, but I'll go into that. I'll explain that. But it also kind of links to the episode I talked about students of content creators and that whole creator economy and how that links to what brands are doing, or if you want to start up your own thing, how that links to that as well. So today I thought it would be cool to talk about the, I don't want to say rise, but the mainstreamification of streetwear. Now I know for a lot of us, if you're in my year, that's fourth year undergrad. I would say year 9, year 10, so that's eighth, ninth grade, there was this kind of boom in streetwear being not only mainstreamed in terms of the kids in your school would kind of adopt that aesthetic, but mainstream in terms of luxury fashion houses were kind of paying attention to streetwear sort of brands and collectives, and were kind of co-opting or collaborating to get those silhouettes and get those pieces and get that kind of feeling in some of their collections and some of the the, I don't know, the runway themes. So I think when you think back to that time, it's almost kind of antithetical when you think about it, because if you look at all the early 2000s, even cartoons, even films, teen films, comedy films, I feel you can definitely see that the whole streetwear aesthetic is tied into other subcultures and aesthetics like skating, hip hop, or underground sort of rap, underground hip hop, and tied into even surfing, different things like that. These different subcultures that are that have their origins in a very countercultural stance or space, or sort of communities that have been brought together through those shared interests and that shared culture. But then B, streetwear sort of aesthetics were also positioned as linked to being low down on the social hierarchy, and linked to that again, that status of othered people in even in the high school context of the Bratz live action movie, for example, as if you want a reference, So I think it was quite interesting to see all of a sudden, at least it seemed to me, all of a sudden, everybody wanted to not so much everybody wanted to get this streetwear look, because I think that's a separate phenomenon in itself, streetwear becoming mainstream in terms of H&M are doing streetwear aesthetics, Adidas full tracksuit outfits were the not only all the rage, but the fashion sort of people Instagram sort of influencers were really into that look and it became mainstream in that sort of becoming trendy sense. But I also mean like to see the streetwear lifestyle and the streetwear like subcultures being becoming mainstream. I think that was for me like more so kind of interesting because all of a sudden it seemed like everybody wanted to be like a skater, everyone wanted to like get into that activity and into that like lifestyle that streetwear kind of took some of its like not inspiration, but it kind of emerged from an intersection of different subcultures, of which skating was one. So I thought that was quite interesting. And the I think you can kind of see, yes, on one hand, it's like high school kids engaging with this, and it's very normal to want to like try out new things, new hobbies, like new ways of again like presenting yourself and like exploring your embodied identity and whatever aesthetic allows you to do that easiest or like more easily. But I I think it's also worth noting that in the behaviors of the high school kids who are adopting like the whole lifestyle behind the streetwear look, like whether it's they're starting to like, produce their own music, whether it's they're like getting into skating, whether it's like I'm sure in other places people were getting to surfing as well. Just I didn't really see that many surfers, but it's the same kind of attendant philosophy that everyone's sort of aware that there's a lifestyle behind this look, and the closer you can get to that lifestyle, the more almost like more authentic your presentation of this like particular aesthetic will be. And this is not to say that it's bad for anyone to do that. Again, like there's nothing wrong with people getting into something new. I'm just saying, isn't it interesting how like you can kind of trace the history of certain aesthetics, certain I guess pieces or items of clothing or even silhouettes that have become commodified and become abstracted from their origins. You can actually trace that origin back to a subculture and back to like a lifestyle, like a very specific thing. I think that's very interesting. And it's something that I think if you look into the actual maybe like visual history of some of these subcultures, like for example, looking into the history of grime in the UK, there's different like photographers, like videographers, like different people who've kind of cataloged that history and really archived that history using their medium of choice, like whether it's a photography sort of like book, like an album of the shots that they got like just meeting up with people like making music in their house or in like a basement or people like going to these sort of like meetups. It just really provides a snapshot into a world that is so vibrant and that is so like very clearly like people are drawn to the activity itself, not just the look of it, if you get what I mean. Because a key thing about that is from a lot of these archival sort of documents, you can tell that there's nothing sort of glamorized about the lifestyle at that point. You know what I mean? Like in case of skating, like there's nothing particularly glamorized about like a skate shop where people, they go to find, I don't know, different equipment, or they go to like congregate and like meet other people and see what videos are showing on like the TV in the shop, or they go to like, just as a place to hang out. It's got that appeal in terms of the social dynamic, but it doesn't have that gloss of like this is a cool and popular thing to do. It's more like I'm engaging in this thing and I'm drawn to this, be it this place or this function or this event or this collective that happens to stand for what I stand for. And in being drawn to that and curious about that, that's how I meet like all these other people who also share this interest, And so that's how things kind of get going in terms of the slow build of momentum to actually create like be it you want to create a brand or you want to create a like a movement, but it's not necessarily that people set out to manufacture a movement when these things start, if you know what I mean. It's more like organic. And then using that momentum, brands kind of emerge out of that, if that makes sense. Because you've already got the the weight of the community behind you naturally, you know. So that like in itself is a sort of popularity factor within that subculture. So I just thought it was interesting how, like, again, like I said with the skating example, it's you're just, if you're like the proprietor of the shop or the brand, you're just engaging with something that maybe you've been skating since you were young, or you got really into it and you really like the sort of technical like technical side of things and like the different tricks, and you like the different, like, I don't know, this you can you can get really into one aspect of something that you like be it how X equipment affects like your performance in Y aspect of skating, or how like different, you can express your style or your artistic sense in different ways using like your board or using your outfit or using your gear. There's kind of different paths that you can take that are still within the remit of like skate culture, but maybe depending on who you are, like you can just focus on what you like. And in focusing on that, maybe, other people who see you with your customized stuff, they're like, oh, that's so cool. Like, where can I get it? Do you take commissions? Like, can you do this for me? And then that's how momentum kind of naturally starts. And, by the time you've like done things here and there for people and you set up your own establishment, that's like an anchoring point for whatever subset of the community happens to be in that neighborhood. Like, I know, just like doing some research, they said that skate shops that are near the actual skate parks, obviously it's like, it's a natural sort of flow of movement. If you're coming there to skate, and then you can go to the shop and, like, as I said before, kind of like see what's new, but also talk to people, share ideas, get to know people, get to like really strengthen that social side of things, in terms of like you're still engaging with the like, I guess, skate culture in general, but you don't actually have to be actively skating at that moment to still do so. And I think that's a key thing. It's that people gathering together with the knowledge that what's bringing them together and what they're talking about and what they're passionate about in their heart is this particular activity or this particular subculture that, like, naturally forms that if people engage in an activity and share an aesthetic and share like, like slang, share like all kinds of things, subcultures naturally form in that way. But the fact that those, if you want to say, like, cultural valences exist already when people are in those social settings and like talking about the the tangential aspects of skating culture, maybe like not actively skating, the fact that there's an awareness and a sort of foundation of those existing like metaphors, existing in jokes, in this existing insider knowledge and like in group identity, that gives strength to those tangential things. So it's like the same thing with Comic-Con, right? You're not actively watching like a movie or watching an anime or watching a series when you're in Comic-Con, but you can talk to people and meet people and like, instantly connect with certain people on the strength of having that shared experience of watching that show, or having that shared experience of being like a super fan of a particular show, or getting the references and the in jokes in someone else's costume, and then that like becomes a talking point that you get to know them off of. It's so interesting to kind of try and dive into why these friendships take off in these spaces. And I think it has a lot to do with that fact of just like you already have something to go off of. You can hit the ground running because you signify to each other by being in that space, in that con, or in that shop, or in that, I don't know, in that cipher, I don't know, whatever context you're meeting in. By being there, it's signaling to the other person that this is already a common ground that we have. And so there's just a certain like acceleration of being able to bond that happens. And I think that's how subcultures form, right? Because you get enough people, and then like there's real momentum behind all these gatherings, and then like that's how that's how YouTubers, for example, build their fan bases, right? Because people in the comments are connecting and talking to each other, or people in the meet and greets, they get to know each other, and there's already that understanding that we've come here for X person, and so there's some assumptions about like what the other person is like in terms of like what they like and like maybe their sense of humor, for example. There's assumptions that you can make based on the fact they've come to see X person, you know? And based on that, you can kind of make quicker decisions as to like, oh, do I think I'll get along with this person? Like how easily can I start a conversation with this person? So I think it's so interesting. And again, it's something that people leverage in different spaces, but you can kind of trace it back to at least some shared like common structures. Yeah. So I guess the significance of pointing that out, at least for me and for BRAIDAR, is that I think it's so cool when brands or like startups in particular focus on like building a sense of community for their brand. And again, like it could be like, paying attention to the YouTube comments or paying attention to like where your target audience um sort of what they already like and where they go, where they hang out online, and using that to understand what kind of community you could build around your particular product offering, based on what that community wants from a product or in an industry. I talked about this a lot in episode 3, so I won't like rehash too much of it. But I think also it's almost like twofold, because on one hand, you've got brands that can leverage existing sort of not communities and not subcultures, but almost like community subcultures and community metaphors, and leverage those existing ones for their products. And I think again it ties back to things like streetwear. Like if someone wants to start a streetwear brand and they're like maybe they're a music producer, like an underground music producer, maybe they're big into like maybe they're on YouTube, they post their music and their covers or what have you. So that to me would lend itself well to the kind of like, you know, underground scene connotations that a certain strand of streetwear has. Because again, I said that streetwear is kind of like there's different elements of different subcultures that streetwear draws on. Some of which is like hip hop, some of which is skating, some of which is surfing. So I'm talking particularly about the hip hop valences in streetwear culture. Like you think about rockaware, you think about Fat Farm, Baby Fat. The reason why, you can make that clear link between the silhouettes, the kind of fashion, and the way that they present the fashion, like be it in the photo shoots or the actual like shows, like the runway shows. You can make clear links between that and the subculture that they're appealing to or like tapping into. Yeah. So I think brands can kind of do that and be very like, it can be very effective for them. They can be very successful with that. And yeah, the other way is it's not making a community from scratch, but it's almost like looking at your target audience. If you've already like narrowed it down and you already know like the sort of psychographics of them, and you've already done the whole like you've begun like the whole social listening process, but then maybe your audience doesn't really map so neatly onto an existing like community subculture. Like for example, if trying to think of a random example now, but like, you know what I mean, like some subcultures you can kind of see very easily if your target audience fits into their target audience or like their target persona. But then sometimes your offering or your target persona is like they may not map so neatly onto an existing one, and that you could like borrow valences from. So I think in those cases you actually need to do a bit of digging into like what again, what makes your target audience tick? What do they like? What shows do they watch? What I guess what subcultures are they a part of? But because it doesn't neatly map onto it, you have to just take like elements of those subcultures that they particularly like. And you almost have to like do a composite of those different elements in order to like I think in order to appeal to them in a community sense. You can still appeal to them like as people, but it become very fractured if you're saying, oh, like this person likes this aesthetic and this person likes that aesthetic, so I'm gonna like tailor my communication to them, like hyper sort of almost like overly specific. It would just kind of waste your time, especially if like you're making like a let's say you're making like a thank you message to send to them for buying your product. You don't want to like go on Canva and make a new like graphic for each person, especially if you want to like maybe grow your business or you want it to become a bit more like scalable and automated. That's just I don't think that's maybe less efficient. Although I don't know, maybe for what you're doing, that would work. But I guess in general, I would definitely say like maybe look at the bigger picture, like maybe zoom out a little bit and then just look at the elements that maybe they like in particular and then work on making a composite or work on the elements that are in common between all their aesthetics. Like, you know, if someone likes cottagecore, princess core, and I don't even know, like, what was it? Pink. There's so many different names for them. But if someone likes certain aesthetics that you can kind of see, oh yeah, here are the overlap areas. Here's the the middle of the Venn diagram, so to speak. Then you can kind of you've got something to work with. And yeah, I think community in particular is interesting because sometimes for when I talked about the in-person brand activations, I was talking about community that has coalesced already around your brand. So it's more about like incumbent sort of brands, it's more about existing companies and the community or like the fandom being users. Like what they're fans of is you. But I think for starting up, it's more about like looking outside of you at what like lifestyles they are part of or like aspire to be a part of and what they're fans of outside of your product or even like outside of your industry. And I think there's a distinction there. Um, like, I think a really good example of a company that's really tapping into what their target audience like, what speaks to their target audience and what their target audience is already engaging with outside of them is Topicals. So, for those of you who don't know, Topicals is like a skincare brand that's run by a woman called Olamide Olowe, and she and her team, they are all so good at this whole like just knowing exactly what makes their target audience tick, right? Like knowing the cultural valences that speak to them, knowing the events that speak to them, knowing the lifestyle that speaks to them because they like number one, like they're already in that audience themselves, right? But number two, they can like see it around them in the kind of content that their audience is already making, the kind of like events and festivals that their audience is already going to. So I feel like what Topicals has done is like put their brand in those conversations by being that bridge between the target audience and that like event or that lifestyle. So let's say like one example could be how they took some of their brand ambassadors and influencers, right, to Ghana in December. I think it might have been December 2023. I think it was. And that really, really, really appealed to their target audience who like were not on the trip, right? Because not only is it like a fun time to be in Ghana, not only is are there those not only is that not only is there that understanding that if you go to Ghana in December, if you go to Nigeria in December, there'll be so many shows on, like everybody will be back, it'll be fun, it'll be warm. You can go to the beach, you can go to like you can just have fun. It's like a homecoming of sorts. Not only are there those valences, but particularly for Topicals audience and like I feel like core or like first audience, like when they launched in the US, there's also those valences of like yeah, I guess homecoming, right? Like that sense of tapping into like the scene in Ghana and like connecting to what's happening there as like um I don't know, just like almost like a bridge between the black diaspora and the sort of country of like what's happening on ground in Ghana. That's what I mean. Not like the whole country in Ghana, but yeah, like it's just that sense of community and that sense of like shared sort of yeah, just shared understanding, shared ways of living that you don't even have to like say it. You kind of implicitly know that this person understands even in part, like in part what it's like, you know? And I think that feeling draws people together and that feeling is also part of what appeals to people about like, you know, Ghana in December, Nigeria in December, like any country in December. So choosing that particular time, that particular place to fly their influencers to for a brand trip is so on brand because Topicals is all about like it's all about I don't even know how to phrase it in a way that fully conveys what I'm thinking. It's all about that feeling of I'm sort of in control of how I want to be in this world, how I want to move about in this world, and I don't have to sort of settle for anything, even if that means like settling, like even if in one context before topicals that would have meant like settling for a particular ointment or particular treatment for certain skin conditions, and you know it would be either they'll be very harsh or either they'll be kind of like just not an enjoyable and fun experience. But then now with topicals, you don't have to settle for that. You can actually have ways to treat skin treatments that are like you know brightly packaged, that are fun, and that also have don't have that stigma around them. Rather, it's been replaced by this like celebratory and like feeling and like the community backing you up and being like, yeah, that's so cool. Like I'm also using this too. Like everyone's sort of happy for each other and everyone has that choice of like, you know, if you want to use X product, fine. If you don't want to, that's also fine. You can choose whatever you want to do. And I think that that ethos really resonates in terms of like being recontextualized in the context of Ghana in December. And just in the context of like taking young black influencers from like the US and from the UK and other places to Ghana in December. Because kind of that thing about, it's kind of that same, like, yeah, like we are not, you know, we can live our best life in any way we want. And we're not sort of constrained to one, like, area, one country, or one mode of being. Yeah, I think that's the crucial thing. We're not constrained to one mode of being. Because I think, you know, for a lot of people, the way, like, I'm not saying this is for everyone. Like, it may not, I'm not saying this is how I sort of see it, but I do know for a fact that for a lot of people, the way that they can move through spaces, the way that they feel, the way that they feel that they can, like, just be is different when they're in, like, you know, some other country compared to when they are on the continent. Like it's a tangible feeling, and it's you know people not just from the African continent, but I think people also from the Caribbean. Like these these are sort of common stories that I have heard of people feeling this sort of like tangible calmness and tangible like almost like a you let out a sigh of like relief and just like you just feel free. You just like here you don't have to kind of do I don't know. You don't have to kind of do all the work and the like the things that made you so tense. Here you can just like unwind and here's like where you feel a sense of belonging and yeah, just those feelings that I think are very very valid and that the more we can kind of make people feel like that in different spaces the better. Yeah. So Topicals is definitely one brand that I think people can learn a lot from, And I think in terms of the different cultural, like different subcultures rather, that you can tap into, I think people should not feel like, so don't feel afraid or don't feel like constrained because you feel like my target audience is this, so they must like this subculture, or oh yeah, this will appeal to them. Like I think for a long time in the like late 20th century and like early 2000s, there was this conflation of urban with black, and I feel like that's an oversimplification. Like even if even if people are trying to say, oh, hip hop culture informed a lot of streetwear, oh, hip hop music videos are what brought certain streetwear brands to prominence within like black communities, and then the mainstreamification of hip hop is what brought that prominence and that popularity, like to like made it bet increased its sort of economic benefits for those brands, like by like actually like positioning them as the sort of top of that pyramid, that as like based on the lifestyle shown in the videos. But I think that's also an oversimplification because it's not really like that's like saying every black person is kind of really keyed into the sort of hip hop scene and the that and understands the valences that kind of make that sort of subculture go round, when that's not really the case. And I think especially for like newer generations, it's always going to look different. It's always going to be slightly like, if you insist on being so stereotypical, you're always going to be behind the curve. Like I think we've all seen those like adverts or those what do you call those, like satirical skits, like all those parodies. Yeah, we've all seen those parodies of like people trying to appeal to like teens, being like, yeah, I'm hip, I'm down, and like even the slang is outdated, talkless of like the clothing or like the way that they're kind of rapping. I don't know, it's like always slightly out of sync with the audience that they're trying to appeal to. And I think, you know, maybe brands are, maybe they're trying their best, but just, I think, especially in that sort of early 2000s time, I think they should have done a bit more digging. Um, and that's just, that's one thing. But there are also brands that were consciously like profiting off like stereotypes and racist assumptions. And I think that's not okay. Like it's one thing to try and be hip and like not quite meet the mark. It's another thing to consciously try and emphasize, highlight, and leverage damaging racist stereotypes, knowing that you can just like either engender anger or engender like some kind of, I don't know, like you just want to position yourself as that guy, but it doesn't even make sense. Like I no, it actually doesn't make sense because how, if you're not actually speaking to an audience or a community, how do you feel that's going to be sustainable? Like that, I don't, that's a whole other conversation. I just think, yeah, it's not great, and it is tied up in a lot of um just unacceptable things. But I think it's just worth noting the more like um non-problematic aspect of it, noting that as an example of like how you shouldn't just oversimplify your community or what subculture you feel appeals to them. And yeah, I think it's definitely really, really impactful when brands that have a black target audience take the time to either like research or ask or get to know, or like, just creatively develop a, like, I don't know, like a presentation or positioning that speaks to some other facet of a subculture that your audience likes, right? Like that's why I said in the other episode, I think it was episode 6 or 5, when I was talking about the intersection of fandom and the black hair industry. Now, this was not my, like, I didn't sort of think this intersection up. It was actually a YouTuber called Jazz Anye. So shout out to her. She's really, really good if you're like into you want to start different kinds of businesses, whether it be a hair business, whether it be like candle business, whether it be like skincare. She's really good at kind of whittling down how you can go about positioning for your specific target audience, and also how you can avoid the cliches and avoid the like the common stumbling blocks for these particular industries. And I think particularly for hair, because there's not a lot of like academic papers and what have you, and like on all these like, I don't know, the establishment of marketing like websites or marketing periodicals. There's not a lot of deep dives into the hair industry like as it stands, and then what you can do to like stand out from that. She is really, really filling that gap for a lot of people, and I think especially a lot of young people. Yeah, so you can check out if you want. Um, I'm actually not sure. I'm actually not sure. She may not be making new videos, but I think her old videos are still up. But anyway, um, I think brands that kind of take the time to think, okay, yes, my consumer, like my target audience or my target persona, might be, for example, a black girl, right? But when I actually dig into what this target audience likes, they may not like, X program. They may like Y program, and that program may be like a certain anime, or maybe like, I don't know, it's just something that's not what you would stereotypically think. And I think that's where the gold lies for a lot of brands, because then you can kind of say, okay, how can I speak to this audience? How can I position my brand in that space such that the brand is the bridge between the audience and that culture, and like the ways in which they want to engage with that culture. So as I said before in the other episode, one way could be providing like cosplay wigs for a particular show or movie or character that your audience is like obsessed with. Provide the wigs for that, and like, I mean, sell them obviously. Or like create a community like platform, where people can discuss different theories, or discuss like, if it's one of those shows that's like week by week episode drops, they can discuss like they're in the 90s, like, oh, did you see this thing that just aired? And it's like that whole shared experience, even if they're not in the same room watching it, because it's airing at the same time for everyone. It's got that same cultural valence as, yeah, like as I said, like in the pre-streaming era, when people will watch shows like Lost, or watch shows like um I don't know, other shows that were big and that had these huge conspiracies attached to them, kind of like Gravity Falls. Yeah, I think that's a good example for anyone who's like a post Lost person. So you, because if you were like, I guess, interested or aware, or even like on YouTube in that era of like 20, whenever Gravity Falls started, to maybe 20, like, I don't know, whenever it ended, that whole mid early 2010s, the amount of conspiracies, the amount of like, not just deep dives and conspiracies in like an abstract and like out there way. I mean, like the amount of meticulous frame by frame analysis, the amount of cross referencing with like different glyphs and deciphering the glyphs, and like making their own what's it called, like ciphers to work out the code, and like work out the like, this was real work. This was real. I don't know if it's like archaeological or like scientific sort of meticulous work was being done on that show, and it was super entertaining, because even me, I was asking questions. I was saying, so what, like, so you mean to say, like, I was interested, and I was following along. And I like that whole thing of like, in someone presenting just, their, not their opinion, but like their passion, presenting their passion, and presenting like, oh guys, this is what I found out, this is what I like think, this is what I feel, and I'm really into this. People can kind of relate to that, and people can kind of um it has a certain likability to that. Like people can I don't know what the word is, but again, it's that basis of like a shared cultural valence, or like understanding of a certain um world, like the world building of a certain world, even if it's fictional, that people can kind of latch onto and be like, oh yeah, like I like that too, and like, I'm interested to know what else is this person like? Like, what's their person like? What's their sense of humor like? Like, what's their fashion like? You know, and I'm not saying this particularly for these, like analysis Gravity Falls videos, but that is how a lot of people become fans of like YouTubers because they want to see like get ready with me's. They want to see like, day in the life. They want to see fashion hauls, and it all comes from that first video that you clicked on from them for whatever reason. Like maybe you liked I don't know what they were saying about this particular show, or you like their reaction video to something, or you like this and that, and then that initial taster based on like an overlap of interest, like your interest being you've typed something to search for it, and their interest being they've recorded something and posted it. That moment of intersection and overlap is a beginning in that like creative fan or brand fan relationship, which I think is quite, I don't know, it's just quite interesting. I think if I were doing some kind of like media studies degree, I would really love to do an essay on that. Or like, I guess if you're doing media, you might do like a video essay on it. But I think that would be so interesting because, again, it's just like looking into how human beings work, looking into like how human psychology plays a part in what we align ourselves with in terms of like fandoms, right? And how fandoms reflect something of like our embodied identity, whether it's like our values, our sense of humor, or even like in a sense it could reflect who you want to be, right? Like, with High School Musical 2, for example, the amount of people who co-opted Sharpay's personality and started terrorizing people at school. Not terrorizing them, but just started like acting up, started trying to try people, I think there's definitely some correlation there. It's definitely quite funny. Side note, guys, if you're in school, you're listening to this, don't let anybody mess you about. Just, this is not it's not a Kenny Ortega film. This is not a Netflix original, Just don't let don't let anybody try that nonsense with you. Unless you, I don't know, you find it funny, I guess. But yeah, just yeah. But I think it's just interesting how different, I guess I'm talking about fandoms now in terms of fans of a particular medium, but I'm also talking about communities type fandoms in terms of like people are fans of a subculture, like how people can be fans of hip hop culture, but they don't necessarily have to make their own music, or people are fans of like surf culture, but they've not surfed before, but they really like genuinely like it, and they genuinely want to engage with it in a like fashion sense and in a like this is how I present my embodied self sense. So, yeah, I think particularly for kids and like teens, it's really interesting to see how that spills out into real life. Because as we all know, a lot of people like the way that you find out about these subcultures and the only way you can interact with them, especially if you're not in like, I don't know, in the UK or in the US where certain subcultures are a bit more like prevalent, the only way you can engage with it is through, the TV, through the Disney channels, okay, through the Nickelodeons, through the Pinterest or the We Heart It, We Heart It gang, like the only way that you can kind of see these lifestyles being lived out is through these windows, which are like mitigated or mediated by screens, right? Your TV screen, your phone screen, your laptop screen. And so I think on one hand, yeah, it's good for like, I want to know everything about this subculture. I want to know about this person. I want to like get to know it in a sort of thorough, like the breadth of it. But in terms of depth, because it's not like an experiential kind of knowledge of these subcultures, you may still find yourself lacking in terms of that depth of like, but I actually want to live this out, right? I actually want to be part of this. I actually want to meet these people. I actually want to make these friends and have these friend groups. And I think for a lot of people, especially in high school and middle school, that's how they were feeling, and it had this, and it brought on this sense of like, I don't know, like not whiplash, not dissonance, but it's like this sense of like, after like people go in a Pinterest rabbit hole and you like put down the phone, it's almost like, where am I? It's almost like, oh, like this kind of disorienting, and it's kind of like dissatisfying because, I've just, I just dived into this world or dove into this world. I don't know what the word is, but I've just kind of taken a dive into this world that I love so much, and that like I wish I could kind of be a part of and like share my version of, and like, trade experiences with these people, and like be actually um embedded in that culture in a lived out way. But because you're not there, or because it's not in your country, or for whatever reason you're too young, whatever, you do get this sort of disorienting feeling that I think contributes to a lot of the, it's not even FOMO, it's just a sense of like sadness about like young people's current lives, that I think fashion is one way of people trying to mitigate that effect, because it's like, okay, I can't engage with them like on a like friendship level yet, because I'm not there and I don't actually know them, and it's more like a parasocial, one-sided kind of like um me ingesting information about them, and they don't actually know that they're even on Pinterest in the first place. Um, so fashion is one way of mitigating that effect, because you're like, okay, well, one way I can engage with this lifestyle and kind of like embody this lifestyle, and hopefully like attract more friends who like this lifestyle and may like the look, is through fashion, right? Or is through beauty. So you start to kind of tap into those fashion trends in ways that you can, like maybe shops that are around you, or when you go somewhere that has the particular brand, like, the famous like streetwear brands, skate brands, famous like athleisure brand. This is off topic, but I think there's a discussion or an essay to be written, or like a discussion to be had about the rise of streetwear as like expensive clothing rather than like, you know, clothing for the everyday person. I think there's a lot to unpack in that. A lot of like classist sort of undertones in the way that streetwear has now been like, streetwear resells for like 50, like, it's just ridiculous. It's like, not saying that it doesn't have that worth. Yes, the pieces have worth, but I'm just saying like, it's almost like the industry, through like reselling and through like other factors, gentrification, through like becoming mainstream, I guess, and through other factors of just becoming more popular and supply and demand. It's almost like the industry as an abstract thing has turned against its original audience and turned against the people who made it popular, or who at least were wearing it in the beginning when nobody else was like taking them serious. Which, yeah, I suppose in a poetic sense is sad, but in a realist sense, maybe that wasn't obviously the intention, but I guess that's how you could kind of spin it if you want to write a cool, like, long form journalistic piece about it, which I might do at some point. Yeah, back to what I was saying. So, fashion is one way for kids to kind of engage with those subcultures, and yeah, I think, especially in, for example, I'm just going to use Nigeria as an example. Not talking about when I was in high school, but talking about now. I think one way in which the Y2K resurgence has this almost like divide is that access to thrift stores is not a globally universal thing. And the positioning of secondhand clothing is not the same in every country as it is in like the US, UK, like, these countries, right, where people, you can kind of go to a charity shop like near you and find the kind of clothing that like that mentally you expect to be in a charity shop, which is like clothing from the past like 15, 20 years, right? But in Nigeria, it's more, there's no like charity shop industry. There's secondhand clothing, but the secondhand clothing is more like, there's a faster turnaround. So like you'll find clothing and fashions that are way more current in those like secondhand boutiques than how here we think of secondhand, which is like noticeably dated. In Nigeria, it's more like secondhand still has some kind of current fashion currency to it. Currency as in like value, as in like, yeah. Yeah, so thrifting, right, is one way that I think a lot of teens in Nigeria are interested and eager to engage with Y2K fashions. Like one way that they one way that they do that. And but with the absence of thrifting, thrift stores or like charity shops that can give them access to that, there's almost that extra layer of friction between like your what you want and then how you can get it. So I think a lot of people who want to start up their own kind of like um what do you call it? There's a word that they use, but it's basically like secondhand selling business, but hyper specific to a particular target audience, which is this like Gen Z audience that wants Y2K. I've seen a lot of accounts like on Instagram that are selling curated Y2K like pieces, right? That you won't necessarily find if you were to go to a secondhand shop in person in Nigeria. So there's this element of like, yes, there's another layer of friction or another obstacle for this target audience in this place, but there's also an opportunity present in there for people who have access to those sources of Y2K, or people who, you know, like you're doing some kind of import export thing, or I don't know, maybe you go to a particular country that has access and you buy stuff, or you order online, or you just hoard clothing and you want to sell. I'm just kidding, but you just have like maybe at home you like someone in your family or you just have some old clothing. There's still opportunity within that difficulty that particular market presents, and yeah, I just think that's super cool. I just think yeah, it's just a cool thing, and it's just yeah, one way that you can kind of look at how, even if a target audience is the same on paper, like 17-year-old girl, you know, in whatever year in school, likes getting, I don't know, French curl braids, even though your target audience might be the same on paper and the location is the only difference, that difference can actually make a actually be very important in how your actual business will work. Because if you're here, right, in like in the UK, yes, you could run an Instagram page and like sell Y2K clothing that way, but you also have, I guess, in a way, more competition and more like options for how to actually sell. Like you could kind of do pop-ups, you could do in person, like like a permanent store. You could do all these things, but then in Nigeria, maybe you think like, yes, you could do an in-person store. Actually, I think that might be a good idea for someone out there. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a different market. It's like you could do an in-person store, but it's not like the first thing that will come to your mind when you think about how can I um sell Y2K clothes in this market. You'd more so go the like online route at first. Um yeah. And I suppose people here do that as well. But yeah, it's just hard to kind of explain exactly, but there's certain nuances in how like how you get the supply, how you store it, how you like position your business in terms of like, are you going from online first then to in person, or are you going to stay online, or how do you do like the delivery, the what do you call it, like is it last last mile like aspect of it, like courier system, because in Nigeria we don't exactly have the same postal structure as here. It's more like couriers and stuff. So yeah, there's just these certain nuances that I think um, that people should look into depending on whatever market they want their business to be in. So yeah, I think that's mostly all that I have to say today. And I think for those of you who are following on with BRAIDAR, the actual company, you should definitely keep an eye out for some interesting things in this regard. Especially, as I said last week, like if you're on, you know, some by some random turn of events, if you're like a prospective student or an incoming first year student and you're listening to Star Radio, like I used to listen to Star like before I came here just to see what here would be like. Yeah, do get in touch if what BRAIDAR stands for and what BRAIDAR is looking to do interests you, because I'm really gonna amp up a lot of what we're doing in terms of like building that community and making a really like welcoming, a really fun space for first years, especially like international first year black girls who, yeah, who are coming to this lovely town for the first time. So yeah, you can reach us on any of our socials. We've got Instagram and we've got Facebook, and it's all capitals BRAIDAR, BRAIDAR, and you can find us there. And yeah, I'm really, really excited for what the future holds. And we have some cool, cool surprises that are in store for the next couple of weeks. And yeah, I guess in terms of the episode that may or may not be about certain doll brands that we've talked about, I guess one thing I can say for now is if you have a favorite song from any of those franchises, like Bratz movies or, the Barbie movies or Monster High, like, or anything kind of similar, if you have a favorite song from that, send in the name to the Braidar Facebook page, you know, and something may or may not happen on the next show related to that song that you send in. Who can say, really? Who can say? But it would be nice to engage with you guys. And yeah, that's all for me for today. But you can definitely hear me again next week, Saturday, 3 p.m. British summertime. Thank you guys for listening. And this has been Jade with Braidar, the business of beauty. Bye for now.